I remember thinking it was just another summer morning when Mike and I locked our front door, the one with the peeling paint we always said we'd fix but never did. Our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, waved from across the street, promising to spoil our cat, Whiskers, in our absence. "Have fun in Italy," she called out, her voice carrying a hint of envy. I forced a smile, my stomach twisting with a mix of excitement and something else I couldn't quite place. Mike didn't notice. He was too busy double-checking our flight information, his brow furrowed, the ever-responsible IT technician making sure we hadn't missed a detail. "Let's not be late," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I nodded, following him to the car, the weight of my suitcase mirroring the heaviness in my heart. The drive to the airport was silent, the kind of quiet that's loud with things unsaid. I tried to fill it with talk about the places we'd see, the food we'd eat, but my words felt hollow. Mike just nodded, his fingers tapping away on his phone, responding to work emails or so I assumed. That's when the first crack appeared, a small, nagging feeling that something between us had shifted, grown colder, like the last days of autumn before winter takes hold. Landing in Rome was supposed to be the moment everything changed. The ancient city, with its ruins and mysteries, was meant to reignite the spark between us, to remind us of the love that had once seemed unshakable. Instead, as we wandered through the Colosseum, I found myself laughing not at Mike's jokes but at Alex's, a charming stranger from Australia with a smile that reached his eyes and a laugh that filled the empty spaces inside me. Our meeting felt like fate, a chance encounter at a cafe the next day sealing the deal. Alex was everything Mike wasn't anymore. Attentive, exciting, alive. We talked for hours, our conversation flowing as easily as the Tiber River, and when we parted, my phone had a new number saved, labeled, "Just in case." "Just in case" came sooner than I expected. The lie slipped out easily, almost too easily. "I'm going on a solo tour today," I told Mike, avoiding his gaze. "Just need some me time, you know?" He didn't question it, just nodded, lost in his own world. Mine, however, was about to collide with Alex's in a way I hadn't anticipated. Tuscany was a dream, its rolling hills and sprawling vineyards the perfect backdrop for what I told myself was a harmless adventure. Alex's hand found mine as we wandered, and I didn't pull away. The thrill of the forbidden pulsed through me, a stark contrast to the guilt that gnawed at its edges. But in that moment, under the Tuscan sun, with Alex's lips on mine, I convinced myself that what happens in Italy stays in Italy. It was a lie, of course, one of many. But as the day turned to evening and I returned to Mike, the lie felt like a truth I wanted to live, even if just for a little while longer. The Tuscan sun was a silent witness to the moment my life veered off its predictable path. There, among the endless rows of vineyards, my lips met Alex's in a kiss that was anything but innocent. It was the kind of kiss that spoke of yearnings kept silent, of desires unfulfilled until now. The guilt? It was there, a shadow at the edge of my mind, but drowned out by the rush of excitement coursing through me. This wasn't the Sarah who meticulously planned her lessons or who spent her weekends grading papers. This Sarah was someone else entirely, someone capable of passion, of recklessness, of betrayal. Returning to Mike, the guilt tried to assert itself, whispering accusations in my ear. But the thrill of my secret silenced it every time. Each kiss, each stolen moment with Alex, was a spark in the monotony of my daily existence. And I clung to it, the excitement of the affair becoming my new normal. It became a game of deception, of living a double life. To Mike, I was exploring Italy's rich tapestry of art and culture, losing myself in galleries and cooking classes. But in truth, I was losing myself in Alex. The lies flowed easier than I'd ever imagined, each one building on the last, creating a facade of a wife consumed by the beauty of Italy, not by the touch of another man. But lies, no matter how well crafted, leave traces. Mike's growing suspicion was evident in his eyes, the way they lingered a moment too long, searching mine for the truth. "You're really loving these art galleries, huh?" he'd ask, a hint of something unspoken in his voice. "Absolutely," I'd respond, weaving tales of Italy's charm and my newfound passion for art, all while my heart raced with the fear of being discovered. The day the receipt from that restaurant in Florence found its way into Mike's hands was the day I thought my house of cards would come tumbling down. "This is for two," he'd said, holding the evidence of my betrayal, his voice laced with a confusion that bordered on suspicion. Panic rose within me, a tide threatening to engulf us both. But I laughed it off, dismissing it as a group outing, a mere trifle. And he wanted to believe me, so he did. The relief I felt was palpable, a reprieve granted by his love, his trust, his denial. Emboldened by his acceptance, my affair with Alex intensified. We were reckless, consumed by a passion that knew no bounds. Days spent exploring Italy's hidden gems, nights entangled in each other's arms, each moment a stark contrast to the life I shared with Mike. It was as if I was leading two lives, each unaware of the other, each existing in its own bubble of reality. But bubbles burst, and lies, no matter how carefully told, begin to unravel. Each day spent with Alex was a day stolen from Mike, from us. And deep down, beneath the excitement and the thrill, I knew I was walking a tightrope, one that led to an inevitable fall. The sun hadn't even set on what was supposed to be just another enchanted evening in Rome when my world started to crumble. There I was, in our rented apartment, my heart racing, a glass of Chianti forgotten on the table. Mike and I had spent the day apart, me exploring the cobbled streets with Alex, under the guise of another solo adventure. But the thrill of the forbidden that had fueled me was quickly evaporating, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread I couldn't shake off. It all came crashing down when I carelessly left my phone on the bed, unlocked, a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. I was in the shower when Mike found it, the steamy air a stark contrast to the cold silence that greeted me as I stepped out. There he was, phone in hand, his face a mask of hurt and disbelief. "Who's Alex?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through me sharper than any scream could. The message on the screen was all the evidence he needed. A string of heart emojis and plans for our next rendezvous, signed with a "can't wait to see you again, love." The room spun around me as I tried to muster an explanation, an apology, anything. But the words got stuck in my throat, guilt cementing them firmly in place. "I can explain," I finally managed, but the look in Mike's eyes told me it was too late. The trust we'd built over years, shattered in an instant by my recklessness. He didn't wait for my excuses. With a shake of his head, he left the room, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed in my bones. I called after him, my voice desperate, but he was already gone, lost in the labyrinth of Rome's ancient streets. My calls went straight to voicemail, each message a plea for forgiveness, a promise to make things right. But deep down, I knew some mistakes were too big to be mended by apologies, no matter how sincere. The night stretched on, endless and unforgiving. Our room, once a haven of intimacy, now felt as cold and distant as the space between us. I replayed every moment, every decision that led us here, the weight of my betrayal heavier with each passing second. How had I let this happen? How had I been so careless, so selfish? The reality of what I'd done, of the pain I'd caused the man I loved, hit me then harder than it ever had. This wasn't just a fling, a holiday romance to be forgotten with the end of our trip. This was the unraveling of our life together, a life I had taken for granted until it was slipping through my fingers. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, I was still awake, my heart aching with regret. The adventure I had sought out in Rome's winding streets had led me here, to this moment of profound loss. And as the new day began, I was left to wonder if the pieces of our broken story could ever be put back together, or if this was the end of the road for us, a love story turned tragedy amidst the ruins of what used to be. The morning Mike walked back through the door of our Rome hotel room, his eyes weary from a night spent wandering the city alone, was the moment I thought we might have a chance. "We need to talk," he said, his voice void of the warmth I'd grown accustomed to over the years. My heart skipped a beat, not in excitement but in fear. This was the talk that could end us, or by some miracle, begin the process of mending what I had broken. The flight back home was a silent movie, each of us lost in our own worlds of hurt and reflection, a stark contrast to the laughter-filled journey we had embarked on weeks before. The miles stretched between us, not just in the physical space on the plane, but in the emotional chasm that had formed. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap with words of apology, of explanation, but the words died in my throat, suffocated by the reality of my actions. Back home, the familiar surroundings of our life together felt alien, as if I were walking through a set of a play where I no longer knew my lines. We tried, in those first few days, to find our way back to some semblance of normalcy. Mike would ask about my day, and I would inquire about his, but our conversations were ghosts of our former communication, echoing in the emptiness of what was left unsaid. The distance between us grew, an invisible wall that no amount of forced small talk could dismantle. I missed him, missed us, more than I had imagined possible. But the harder I tried to reach out, to reconnect, the more he withdrew, his hurt a fortress I couldn't breach. Then came the day I found the business card of a divorce lawyer tucked away in his jacket pocket. The reality of our situation, stark and undeniable, hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a rough patch or a temporary setback. This was the end of the road for us. The legal proceedings that followed were a blur of signatures and documents, each one erasing a part of the life we had built together. Sitting across from Mike in the sterile office of the divorce lawyer, I wanted to scream, to argue, to plead for another chance. But the look in his eyes, one of resolute finality, silenced me. This was the consequence of my actions, a price paid in the currency of a broken heart and a shattered marriage. As I signed the last of the papers, the finality of it all weighed heavily on me. The man I had married, loved, and betrayed was now a stranger, connected to me only by the memories of a life that once was. The process was clinical, devoid of the love, anger, or passion that had once defined us. We were just two people, undoing the ties that had bound us, each signature erasing a bit more of what we had shared. Walking out of the lawyer's office, the reality of my new life without Mike loomed large. The journey that had started with a forbidden kiss in the Tuscan sun had ended here, in the cold, impersonal confines of a legal office. The weight of my choices, of the betrayal that had led us here, was a burden I would carry long after the ink on the divorce papers had dried. The morning we started dividing our lives into two piles of yours and mine felt like dissecting a shared dream with a scalpel, precise, cold, and unforgiving. Each item we picked up, from the mismatched coffee mugs we'd collected over the years to the photos from vacations now tainted by my betrayal, was a stark reminder of the life we were dismantling, piece by piece. "I'll take the couch," Mike said, his voice devoid of any emotion, as if discussing the weather. "You keep the dining table." The casualness of it, the normalcy he projected in dividing our shared history, was more painful than I'd anticipated. The day I moved out was one of the longest of my life. My new apartment, a stark, impersonal space in the city, felt like a tangible manifestation of my choices, empty and echoing with the consequences of my actions. As I unpacked, I couldn't help but think of Mike, alone in our now half-empty house, surrounded by the ghosts of our past. The fallout from our divorce spread through our circle of friends and family like ripples in a pond, each wave bringing with it a mix of shock, disappointment, and in some cases, support. The story of Sarah, the high school teacher who threw away her marriage for a fleeting affair, became a cautionary tale whispered in the corners of gatherings I no longer attended. Mike, in his quiet way, had his own version of revenge. Without a word to me, he sent a detailed account of the affair to Alex's partner back in Australia. The backlash was immediate and intense. Alex confronted me, anger and betrayal marking his features. "Did you think this wouldn't get back to me?" he demanded over the phone, the hurt in his voice a mirror to the one I'd seen in Mike's eyes. Our affair, once a secret shared in the shadows of our vacation, was now out in the open, its repercussions reaching farther than I could have imagined. The whispers followed me to work, where rumors of the affair had somehow found their way into the halls of the school where I taught. My professional reputation, once built on respect and dedication, was now tarnished by the personal choices I'd made. Colleagues who once greeted me with warm smiles now offered nothing but cold shoulders, their judgment clear in their avoidance. Mike, for his part, became a shadow of the man I'd married. He withdrew into himself, his trust in relationships, in love, shattered by my actions. He threw himself into his work, using it as a shield against the pain, becoming more of a recluse with each passing day. His silence was a constant reminder of the depth of hurt I'd caused, a wound that no amount of time seemed capable of healing. In the solitude of my new apartment, surrounded by boxes of a life half-lived, the full weight of my choices settled around me. The excitement of the affair had long since faded, leaving in its wake a trail of destruction that spanned continents and lives. I was left to navigate the aftermath alone, the echoes of my decisions a constant companion in the empty spaces of my new reality. The silence in my new apartment was deafening, a constant reminder of the isolation my choices had led me to. Friends who once filled my days with laughter and plans now kept their distance, their silence allowed judgment of the indiscretion I couldn't undo. It's funny, in a tragic sort of way, how quickly people can erase you from their lives, as if they're afraid infidelity is contagious. One evening, lost in thought in the quiet hum of the city outside my window, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. But even alone, with nothing but my thoughts for company, I couldn't bring myself to fully face the reality of my actions. It was easier to blame the circumstances, the distance that had crept into my marriage, anything but the choices I had willingly made. The universe has a cruel sense of humor, it seems. At a mutual friend's party, a gathering I had almost convinced myself not to attend, I bumped into Mike. The air around us charged with a tension so thick it felt like wading through molasses. Our conversation, if you could even call it that, was a series of awkward exchanges, the chasm between us wider than ever. In a quiet corner, away from the curious eyes of those who knew snippets of our story, we spoke for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I'm moving," Mike said, his voice devoid of any warmth it once held for me. "I can't be here, not anymore." His words were a final nail in the coffin of whatever hope I might have harbored for a reconciliation, his goodbye as cold and detached as his stare. The fallout wasn't just personal. At work, the whispers had grown too loud to ignore, culminating in a formal reprimand for conduct unbecoming of my position. Standing in front of the school board, receiving a lecture on morality, felt like a surreal addition to the nightmare my life had become. My career, once a source of pride and accomplishment, now felt like yet another casualty of my actions. In the wake of everything, I tried to find a way forward, a path back to some semblance of the person I used to be. I joined community groups, threw myself into volunteer work, anything to fill the void left by the implosion of my marriage. Each day was a struggle, a fight to rebuild from the rubble, but the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, or so I kept telling myself. Yet, with each new step, I couldn't shake the feeling of being adrift, of having lost a crucial part of myself along the way. My attempts at rebuilding were not just about finding a new routine or filling my days with distractions. They were a desperate search for redemption, for a way to live with the choices I had made. The path ahead was unclear, marked by the shadows of past mistakes, but it was a path I had to take, one painstaking step at a time. In the quiet of my apartment, the realization hit me like a wave, relentless and unforgiving. It wasn't just Mike I'd lost. It was my dignity, the respect of those around me, and a part of myself I feared I'd never get back. The gravity of what I'd done, the sheer weight of my betrayal, settled around me, a tangible presence in the room. For so long, I'd been caught in the whirlwind of my actions, but now, faced with the silence of my choices, the full extent of my loss was undeniable. With nowhere else to turn, I sought refuge in therapy, a desperate bid to untangle the web of emotions and decisions that had led me here. Each session was a journey into the depths of my own psyche, confronting truths I'd long avoided. It was daunting, this path to self-improvement, littered with the debris of my past choices. Yet, with each revelation, each tearful admission, I began to understand the why behind the what, the underlying currents that had swept me so far off course. Meanwhile, Mike had embarked on a new chapter of his own, miles and worlds away from the life we once shared. In a new city, with a new job, he sought to rebuild, to find solace in a fresh start. His past, our past, was a closed book, one he no longer wished to open. The change of scenery, the new faces and places, offered him a semblance of peace, a chance to heal without the constant reminders of what had been. Yet, for all our attempts to move forward, the memory of the affair lingered, a shadow that trailed behind us. It was there in the quiet moments, in the spaces between new experiences and encounters, a ghost from a life we'd both tried to leave behind. The thrill of the affair, once so intoxicating, now seemed a paltry thing compared to the wreckage it had left in its wake. In a moment of clarity, fueled by months of therapy and introspection, I penned a letter to Mike, an apology not meant to bridge the gap between us, but to acknowledge the hurt I had caused. It was an attempt at redemption, however futile, a need to express my regret, to say the words that had gone unspoken. I didn't expect forgiveness, nor did I deserve it, but I needed him to know that I understood the depth of my wrongdoing. Mike's response, or lack thereof, was a silence that spoke volumes. The letter remained unanswered, a testament to the depth of his hurt, a hurt I had inflicted. His silence was the final piece of our story, a story that had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, lingering sorrow. And so, we continued on our separate paths, the scars of our past a permanent reminder of the history we shared and the pain it had wrought. Our story, once filled with love and hope, had ended in a way neither of us could have imagined. The lessons learned were hard-won, the cost of our actions higher than either of us had anticipated. In the end, it was a tale of loss, of love gone awry, and the long, difficult journey towards redemption and self-discovery.